Welcome everyone to this brief introduction to the History of Ceramic course, The Art of the Future. In this course, we will be looking at 7 aesthetics and then 7 themes, all related to the history of ceramics throughout history, throughout geography, throughout chronology. The first one will be the classical aesthetics, the continuity of form. It is quite interesting to consider that in the history of ceramics, certain forms are recurring over long periods of time, that the very same shapes are making their presence felt again and again and again, all the way to today. And this happens all over the world throughout time. We have examples of this from Mesopotamia, from China, examples from Africa, and contemporary artists are looking at the history of ceramic and this continuity of form to create work of great originality. In the 18th century and 19th century, there was a revival called the New Classicism, and we will also be looking at this revival of those forms in European manufacturers at that time. And again, 2 examples of contemporary artists looking at the classical aesthetics coming from Asian forms combined with the classical aesthetics coming from Greek and European forms to make their work today. And examples from China, from Yixing China on the left, and the influence it had on the development of Wedgwood ware, for example, in England in the 18th and 19th century. The second aesthetics we will be looking at is the flux aesthetics, the unifying surface, and the drip, which looks at the incredible contribution glazed surfaces have made to the development of an aesthetics that's specific to ceramics. And again, this is found all over the world in all or most cultures anyway. And the contributions of Asia are particularly notable in that sense, both in Japan and in China itself from the Tang Dynasty. And as I've mentioned earlier, this has an influence as well on the development of contemporary work, where certain types of colors and their conflations and certain types of glazes are still used currently today to create this very deep connections with the past, with the history of the field, and how it can serve to create a dialogue between distant past and the contemporary world. The third aesthetics we will look at, a very important one, is the decorative aesthetics, abstraction and ornament. And again, how decorative surfaces of all kinds, whether they be organic abstractions or the conflations of all kinds of conceits together, as we see in this plate of Italian maiolica on the right, and the use of floral decorations of the arabesque, of again how floral decoration in their symbolic natures to speak of regeneration and growth and fertility and so on and so forth, and all kinds of other symbols are still used today in the work of many contemporary makers. The use of geometry, the relationship between different patterns and form will all be looked at. And again, this wonderful example of a 1,000-flower vase from Qing Dynasty, China, and its reinterpretation in a contemporary work on the right. And the role of geometry in abstraction, and how abstraction is a very ancient phenomenon in ceramics and in other art forms as well, and how this history has been to a large degree occulted, and how it plays a role in a revival of the use of geometry in contemporary works. And to complete these presentations on the decorative aesthetics, we will also be looking at the notable contribution of blue and white in the field of ceramics itself. Then we will be looking at the narrative aesthetics, framing and fiction. And this is what happens when framing devices of all kinds are interrelated with narrative scenes in ceramics, and the conflation of the image with the object, the 2D and the 3D, the surface and the form, are all things we will be looking at again throughout the history of ceramics in different countries, in different cultures at different times, and how all of those things can be reduced to a few laws that we can understand to make sense of what happens when narrative scenes, representational image, are conflated within the context of framing device of all kinds on ceramic forms and ceramic objects. And another aesthetics will be the simulation aesthetics, illusion and limitation. It's quite interesting to consider that ceramic can take many different forms and can often imitate other material, other art forms, and find its manifestation in all kinds of rather exciting ways. And clay and ceramics can be used to imitate all kinds of objects, all kinds of material, take a broad variety of forms, and we find examples of that at the level of form, of course, and also at the level of surface, where the surface is imitative of prints, for example, or things like shells. And again, it's to look into the impact of that approach to making in ceramics, the simulation aesthetics, in the making of contemporary works. And then the industrial aesthetics, purity and perfection. We will be looking at many examples from historical time of the development of industrial process, multiplicity, mold making, and so on in ceramics. But I'm just showing you a few examples here of contemporary work using that aesthetics to, again, at the level of form or at the level of surface, with the use of printing, of reproduction technologies, to create work in a very interesting dialogue with industrial processes. And it's also interesting to consider how very original, unique, and made objects can have an aesthetics that's referencing the approach of industrial making. And then the last aesthetic we will be looking at is the material aesthetics, the obsession with clay. And contrary to the other aesthetics which are found basically since the origin of ceramics in history throughout the whole world, the material aesthetics finds its origin specifically in Japan. And we will be looking at how the extreme approach to making and materiality and excessive process has had a tremendous influence on the development of contemporary ceramics as well, notably to the use of wood firing, for example, and an approach to deconstruction and making work where the physical nature of the object itself and its transformation through excessive process are central to the making of the wares. Then we will have also 7 themes to complete this analysis of the role of ceramics in history, in culture, and civilization. And the first one will be food, the necessities of containment, food for thought. And again, a tremendous number of very exciting objects will be presented where this very intimate and deep connections between ceramic and food will be analyzed in objects like propaganda ware coming from the Russian Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century. Other example here where images of famine, of the lack of food, of people dying of hunger are inserted into the context of ceramics in very exciting ways. And the section on food for thought will look at very interesting and amazing objects that are not meant to contain food, but are really meant to contain themselves, to be world unto their own. And that's quite interesting for me to analyze as well. The second theme will be shelter, bricks, and tiles. And we tend to forget that ceramics plays a very significant role at the level of architecture in the use of bricks and tiles. And we will be looking at many examples throughout the history. It's an aspect of ceramics that's often occulted in the history of the field itself. And it will be interesting to analyze and look into how brick, tiles, and ceramic have made very significant contribution to history. Another theme will be hygiene, the body and its function. And then again, it's quite interesting to consider how the relationship of ceramics to the bodies, to bodily functions, to sink, toilets, bathrooms, and so on, is more or less ignored into the history of ceramics. And I believe that ceramic has played a very significant role in the contribution it makes to those problems and issues in human nature. Another theme will be the figure and the figurine. Again, it's quite interesting to consider that the earliest ceramic objects are not vessels, but they are figurative work, goddess figures coming from the Neolithic period, and we will be looking at very exciting development in the making of figurative work in ceramics in various periods and countries and so on. And you can see here how this relationship between vessel forms and bodies are quite interesting, and also the psychological nature of human representation in art. The idea of the fragment of parts of objects, of just a hand or a foot as part of a figurative part of the use of figuration in ceramics will also be introduced into that theme. Another theme that's very neglected is text, speaking volumes, language, and memory. And it is fascinating to realize that ceramics itself has a very intimate and deep connections to the development of language, of writing, of mathematics, and also printmaking. And we will be looking at those relationships going back thousands of years in time all the way to today, with people making books, for example, and using books as a mean to speak of knowledge, of power, of containment, and all kinds of issues of that nature. One of the last theme we will be looking at is sex spots, eroticism, and ceramics. Clay is a very tactile, very physical, very malleable, very transformative material that has great possibilities to have erotic connotations. And we will be looking at the long history of eroticism in ceramics and its impact on the work of contemporary makers as well. The very last theme will be death, the fragmentation of time, the past, the present, and the future. And again, looking into this intimate relationship between eroticism and death and sicknesses, and what happens when things break, and the death of ceramic itself through its fragility but also its permanency in time, the way it is the most archival material ever devised by humankind, the way it may break and become shards and fragments of things, but those fragments are connected deeply to history. They become archives of specific events and specific things that have happened in the past. And it is in that sense that ceramics can be said to be the art of the future. And we will be looking at all of those aesthetics and all of those themes to analyze through the history of ceramics how a deeper knowledge of that history can serve us to make exciting artwork today. Thank you.